When humanity first joined the Galactic Council, they believed it would be a new beginning for all people of Earth who had struggled for centuries to find peace and meaning among themselves, and now reached out to the stars with open hands and hopeful hearts. But what they found was a council filled with cold politics and endless debates where their voices were small and often ignored. Even when they brought new ideas and offered help, the others looked at them with suspicion and doubt, thinking of humans as too young, too emotional, too unpredictable to be trusted with great power. Commander Ethan Brooks was among the first to serve as a human representative aboard a council fleet. He had worked for years on Earth leading exploration, missions through the outer systems, and had earned respect among his crew for his calm mind and strong will. But in the council chambers, his voice was just another sound among many, and most of the time it was drowned out by the endless arguments of other species who thought they were wiser. Laura Bennett was a political advisor from New York sent to work on the diplomatic front with the council. She had believed in peace and cooperation between the stars, but soon she learned that peace, in the council's words, meant silence for those who were not powerful. The council's members loved to talk about balance and unity, yet their actions showed something different. They sent human fleets to protect borders that were not human. They used human engineers to build stations and ships but offered little in return. And when a human asked for help for their colonies, the answer always came too late, or not at all. Earth's people began to feel that they had traded their freedom for promises that were never real. And even though the flags of the council hung on every major colony, there was a quiet sadness growing behind every smile. Ethan saw it clearly on the faces of his crew as they patrolled sectors far from home, defending trade routes that belonged to other species when a pirate attack came. They were the first to respond when a station fell into distress. They were the first to help. Yet every loss, every broken ship, every funeral was treated by the council as a number on a report, and nothing more. He wrote to Laura telling her that something had to change, and she agreed. She told him that the leaders on Earth were already whispering about leaving the council, about building something new, something truly human. But no one dared to speak it too loudly because leaving meant breaking centuries of diplomacy and losing the protection of a great alliance, even if that protection was already hollow. The breaking point came after a mission near the Orion Spire where a conflict between two alien powers had turned into a massacre. Human ships were sent to calm the situation, but the council delayed orders to act. By the time Ethan's fleet arrived, entire colonies were destroyed, and thousands of lives were gone when he returned to the council to report what had happened. They told him that human ships should not have interfered too soon, that they should have waited for permission. Ethan looked around the hall, filled with shining armor and elegant robes, and he realized that the lives of his crew meant nothing to them. He left that chamber with quiet anger and the thought that maybe humanity had outgrown the need to serve anyone but themselves on Earth. Laura watched the news come in from the colony's. Protests began in every city. People carried banners saying humanity first among equals. Some shouted that the council had used them long enough, and others asked for unity to build a new alliance made by humans for humans. Mars joined the voices, and soon the outer colonies followed. The discussions in government were fierce. But one thing was clear. The trust was gone. In one quiet evening, Laura sat in her small office on the Mars embassy, looking out the window at the red plains below, and she wrote the first draft of what would later be known as the Declaration of Withdrawal. She did not know if the world would accept it, but she felt it was time to take a stand. She sent it to Ethan, who was still serving at the border, and when he read it, he knew it was the truth. They both knew there would be consequences, but neither cared anymore. Weeks passed as the council tried to stop the growing movement. They sent envoys and made promises, but humanity was tired of words. When the final vote took place, the result was clear. Earth, Mars, and the colonies all voted to withdraw from the Galactic Council. It was the first time in galactic history that a member species had left by their own choice. The council chamber fell silent when the announcement was made. Some called it madness, others arrogance, but for humanity, it was a new beginning. The banners of the council were lowered from human ships and replaced with the symbol of the Terran Alliance. The stars that once seemed distant now felt closer than ever, as if they were calling them home. Ethan returned to Earth and met with Laura at the Capitol. They stood before the crowd as leaders of a new era, not as soldiers or politicians, but as people who had dared to say no to the powerful. The air was filled with cheers and the hope that had long been missing. Humanity had stepped away from the shadow of others, and for the first time in many generations, they looked at the sky and saw it not as something owned by others, but as a place that belonged to them. The first act of the new alliance was to begin building ships that would explore the stars on their own terms. No council rules, no foreign command, only human will and human vision factories. On Earth and Mars worked day and night to create the new fleets. Engineers young and old poured their hearts into designs that blended beauty and strength. And soon the first ship, named Dawnlight, rose from the docks and sailed into the black, carrying the dreams of billions. Ethan watched it rise with quiet pride, knowing that this was what all the sacrifices had been for. Laura stood beside him. Smiling through tears, they both understood that leaving the council had not been easy, but it was necessary. It was the only way for humanity to become what it was meant to be. Independent, united, and strong among the stars. The council still sent messages offering reconciliation and talks, but humanity no longer answered. They were done with empty words. They had chosen action, and through that choice they found themselves. The universe was vast and dangerous, but humanity had always thrived in struggle. They had learned to adapt, to fight, to rebuild, and they would do it again and again, until they were no longer underestimated. And when the light of the dawnlight faded into the horizon, Ethan turned to Laura and said softly, "It feels like the real journey begins now." She nodded and said, "It always does, when we stop asking for permission and start walking on our own path." And with that, they walked back to the command center, ready to guide humanity into its next chapter together as one. After humanity left the Galactic Council, the universe seemed to pause, as if it did not know what to make of their choice for a while. There was peace mixed with confusion. Some species called it a bold step, while others whispered that humans would regret it. The council made statements about how they wished humanity well, but everyone knew it was a wound to their pride on Earth. People celebrated with fireworks across cities, and colonies joined through live broadcasts from Mars and Titan. There was hope in the air that had not been felt for a long time. Commander Ethan Brooks now. Admiral stood beside Laura Bennett as they watched the lights of celebration fill the night sky. They both felt the weight of what they had done, but also the joy of seeing their people free. Ethan was given command of the First Terran Alliance fleet, while Laura was appointed as the new Chief of Interstellar Affairs. Their jobs were not easy. They had to rebuild a system that once relied on the Council for guidance and protection. Now everything had to be done alone. Trade routes that once passed through Council channels were closed. Colonies that once received supplies through alien ports now had to depend on their own ships. It was a time of challenge, but also of creativity. Human engineers worked day and night to redesign old ships and create new ones faster, stronger, and built entirely by human hands. At first it was hard. The colonies feared shortages of medicine and parts, but the Alliance managed to keep things running through careful planning and teamwork. Ethan spent his days traveling between shipyards, making sure that the new fleet was ready to protect the colonies. He spoke to pilots, technicians, and workers who all believed that they were building more than ships, they were building their future. Laura spent her time at the newly formed embassy on Luna, where she and her team built the framework for what would become the Terran Charter, a simple set of laws that all human worlds would follow. She made sure it was built on fairness and equality. No planet would be left behind. No colony ignored. She wanted unity, not by force, but by choice. And slowly her dream began to take shape. News spread across the stars that humanity was rising faster than anyone expected. They had left the Council only months ago, yet they were already trading again, this time on their own terms. Alien merchants came quietly to Earth wanting to buy the new human technology. The Council had once dismissed humans as reckless inventors, but now they saw that their creativity had no limit when unchained. Ethan's fleet began patrols across the frontier, not to fight, but to protect explorers and traders. The humans who had once served under alien command now served their own people with pride. Every success built confidence. Every victory built faith in what they could achieve without the Council's oversight. As months turned into years, the Terran Alliance began. To grow stronger, its influence spreading across nearby systems, new colonies were founded not under council law, but under the banner of Earth and Mars. The stars felt open again, free of endless politics and slow bureaucracy. Humanity was learning to stand tall in its own way. But the council was not pleased. They had believed that humanity would fail without them, and they watched with growing unease as human ships expanded trade networks that once depended on council approval. They tried to limit trade by warning others that humans could not be trusted. But profit spoke louder than politics, and soon alien traders ignored the warnings and came anyway. One such trader was a Zorathian captain named Keelan, who met with Laura on Luna. He had come to offer rare minerals in exchange for human engine designs, and though the council forbade such trade, he said quietly that his people admired humans for their courage. Laura accepted the deal, and it became the first unofficial treaty between the Terran Alliance and another species. Meanwhile, Ethan's fleet faced small threats from raiders and smugglers who tried to take advantage of the new order. He responded with calm strength, always avoiding unnecessary fights, but making sure everyone knew that human space was protected one day. His flagship Horizon detected a distress signal from a civilian convoy near the fringe of known space. It turned out to be a group of miners attacked by Tharun raiders. Ethan ordered his ships to respond at full speed. The battle was brief but brutal. Human ships fought with precision, their new railguns and energy shields outperforming anything seen before. When it was over, the convoy was saved, and the news spread fast across the galaxy. The Tharun were shocked that humans had defeated them so easily, and the council took notice. They realized that humanity's growth was no longer something to ignore. Laura received messages from council diplomats asking for dialogue, but she refused, politely saying that humanity had no interest in returning to the council. Ethan agreed, saying that peace did not mean obedience. It meant respect. Soon Terran engineers unveiled a new invention called the Horizon Drive, which allowed ships to jump between systems faster than any council technology before it. This changed everything. Now human fleets could reach distant colonies in days instead of weeks. Trade grew faster. Defense became stronger, and exploration teams set out to chart regions no one had seen before. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were expanding beyond the limits set by others. With every discovery, the people of Earth and Mars felt pride, knowing they had done it on their own. The council grew, nervous, fearing that their influence was fading. They began spreading rumors saying that humans were building weapons for conquest, but the truth was simpler. Humanity had learned to protect themselves and no longer needed approval from anyone. Ethan stood in the command room of his ship, looking at the stars, and thought of all the generations who had dreamed of this moment. Laura worked from Luna, watching the reports come in from the new colonies, and smiled, seeing that her plans for unity were working. She often thought of how far they had come from the days of begging for council votes. Now their votes were their own, and their future belonged to no one else. Still, she knew that success often brings jealousy and fear, and that some in the council would not rest easily, knowing humans were becoming powerful. One evening, she received a private message from an unknown source warning that the Tharun were planning something against the Terran border. She sent it immediately to Ethan, who promised to prepare quietly. He strengthened patrols and ordered new defenses to be built around key systems. The peace they had built was fragile, but humanity was ready to defend it if needed. Ethan knew that leaving the council had given them independence, but it also meant they stood alone in the face of danger. Yet he did not fear that, because he believed in the strength of his people. He believed in their will to endure. When he looked out at the stars, he saw not a void, but a promise, and he knew that whatever challenge came next, humanity would face it together. And they would endure not as subjects of a galactic council, but as free children of Earth, standing proud under the endless light of the stars. Years passed since humanity left the Galactic Council, and the stars began to tell new stories about them. No longer seen as the young race that once begged for a seat at the table, they were now spoken of as builders, explorers, and fighters who shaped their destiny without fear. The Terran Alliance had grown strong, its colonies stretched across sectors that were once forgotten by the Council, and new cities sparkled on distant worlds where once there was only dust. Admiral Ethan Brooks stood on the bridge of his flagship Horizon. looking at the vast black space filled with the shining lights of the fleet that now bore the symbol of Earth and Mars. He felt proud of what humanity had achieved in so short a time. Yet he also felt the heavy silence that came after progress for peace was never guaranteed. Laura Bennett, now head of the Terran Assembly, worked tirelessly to keep the colonies united. She knew that freedom could easily turn to chaos if people forgot what they had built together. Every day she spoke with governors, scientists, and military leaders, reminding them that the Alliance was not just a government. It was a promise made by all humans to never bow again. The economy flourished, trade between the colonies increased, and new technologies made life easier and longer. The invention of the Horizon Drive had changed everything, and human ships now reached places no one had ever dared to explore. One such mission was led by Captain Daniel Hayes, who ventured beyond the rim where ancient signals had been detected. His discovery would later reshape the fate of the galaxy. But for now, his ship, the Aurora, sent only quiet reports of strange energy readings and unknown structures. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council struggled without humanity's presence. They found themselves trapped in endless arguments about trade, defense, and resources that were once handled by human fleets. Their supply lines were stretched, their colonies vulnerable to raids, and their unity began to fracture. Many species still blamed humanity for the imbalance, saying that their departure had broken the old order. Yet others quietly admired them, and even began to question the authority of the Council itself. Whispers of reform started to echo in hidden corners, but the Council leaders refused to listen, believing they could still control the galaxy through old traditions. Ethan received intelligence from his scouts that the Tharoon had begun expanding again, this time deeper into neutral space. They were seizing mining worlds and forcing smaller species into submission. The Council tried to intervene, but their fleets were too slow, too divided, too weak. When Ethan heard that human traders had been attacked near the Vega sector, he knew what would come next. He ordered patrols to increase and asked Laura for permission to strengthen the borders. She agreed, though her heart grew heavy with worry. She had worked so hard to keep peace, and now it felt like war was slowly walking toward them. The Tharoon ignored warnings from the Terran Alliance, and soon one of their fleets crossed into human territory. It was a small attack meant to test the new alliance, but the response was immediate. Ethan led his ships. With precision and strategy that came from years of experience, the battle lasted hours, and when it was over, the Tharoon were forced to retreat. The news spread quickly across the stars. Humanity had won again, and not just with power, but with control and discipline that even their enemies respected. Yet victory brought new questions. The Council sent messages urging restraint, asking humanity not to escalate the situation. They spoke of peace, but Ethan could hear the fear in their words. They did not want a new power rising beyond their reach. Laura met with her advisors on Luna to discuss the message. Some argued that they should ignore the Council. Others said they should send an envoy to show goodwill. She listened to every voice, then made her choice. She would send a small delegation led by diplomat Aaron Miles to attend a Council summit, not as a member, but as an observer. The decision surprised many and angered a few, but Laura believed that showing strength through dialogue was better than isolation. For now, Aaron's visit to the Council chambers was the first contact between humans and the galactic leaders in years. When he arrived, the hall was filled with silence. The alien delegates stared at him, some with curiosity, others with resentment. He spoke calmly, saying that humanity did not seek control or war, only respect and cooperation on equal terms. But his words were met with cold expressions and quiet whispers. When he returned to Luna, he told Laura that the Council had changed nothing. They were still arrogant, still blind to the new reality. She nodded, knowing deep down that he was right. While humanity built a new world, the Council still clung to the old one. Time moved forward, and humanity's power continued to rise. The Terran Alliance unveiled the new Genesis shipyard in orbit around Titan, where massive exploration cruisers were built, capable of carrying thousands of settlers to new worlds. Ethan visited the site and felt awe at the scale of human ambition. They were no longer content with nearby systems. They wanted to reach beyond the edge of the known universe. Colonization missions began to leave one after another, carrying families, workers, scientists, and soldiers into the unknown. It was a time of dreams, but also of unease, for the Tharun and other aggressive species saw the growth of humanity as a threat. Rumors spread that they were planning a large strike to stop the Terran expansion before it became unstoppable. One night, as Laura worked late at her office, she received an encrypted message. It contained intercepted data, showing fleet movements near the border. She sent it immediately to Ethan, and within hours he ordered the fleet into high alert. His instincts told him that another war was coming, but this time it would not be a small skirmish, it would be a test of survival. Still, he felt no fear because he trusted his people, the engineers, the pilots, the colonists. Everyone had built this new age together, and they would defend it together days later. The first attack came at dawn when the stars above Mars glowed red from the light of approaching ships. The alarm spread quickly, and human defenses responded with speed and precision. The sky was filled with fire and steel. The battle lasted through the night, and when the smoke cleared, humanity stood victorious once more. But the cost was high. Hundreds of ships damaged, many lives lost. Ethan stood among his officers, silent as they read the reports. He felt both pride and sorrow, knowing that freedom always came with a price. Laura spoke to the Alliance later that week. Her words broadcast across every colony. She said that humanity had faced worse before and survived, and that now they must hold together more than ever. She reminded them that they had chosen this path, and that their unity was their strength. Her voice was calm and steady, and by the end of her speech, people across the colonies felt courage returning. The council watched, from afar, unable to interfere, yet they could not hide their fear. They saw that humanity had not only survived but thrived even under attack, and some began to wonder if the time had come to reach out sincerely for peace. Ethan looked out from his ship at the quiet stars after the battle. The wreckage drifted silently, a reminder of the price of independence, but also of the strength of those who dared to fight for it. He thought of Laura and all they had built, and he knew the story of humanity was only beginning, and that whatever challenges came, they would meet them together with open eyes and unbroken hearts, as they always had since the day they chose to walk their own path among the stars. The war with the Tharun changed everything for humanity. It was the first great test of the Terran Alliance, and it showed the galaxy that humans were not a power to be dismissed. The Council had expected them to fall, but instead they stood taller than ever. Their fleets repaired, their cities rebuilt, and their unity grew stronger. Admiral Ethan Brooks spent long nights walking through the command decks of his ships, thinking about those they had lost, and about the future that now waited before them. Humanity had survived the fire, but he knew that peace was fragile and must be guarded with wisdom. Laura Bennett, meanwhile, faced her own battle in the political halls of Luna, where the Terran Assembly was meeting to decide how to move forward. Some argued that they should strike the Tharun again and end the threat once and for all. Others believed that war would only bring more enemies. Laura listened to them all before she spoke, her voice calm and firm. She said that humanity had already proved its strength, now they must prove their wisdom. The Assembly agreed, and the first peace mission of the Terran Alliance was sent to the Tharun border under the banner of the Dawnlight, the same ship that had once carried hope into the stars. The mission was led by Captain Daniel Hayes, who had earned respect across the fleet for his courage and steady mind. He carried a message written by Laura herself, offering a ceasefire and the chance to rebuild together when the Dawnlight reached the Tharun command world. There was silence. No one answered their calls for 2 days, and then finally a voice came through, harsh and uncertain, asking what humanity wanted. Daniel read the message slowly and clearly, and when he finished there was a long pause before the Tharun leader replied, saying that they would consider it. And so the first fragile talks began far from Earth. Ethan followed the reports with care, while preparing the fleet for any trick. He had seen too much war to trust easily. But he hoped Laura's plan would work because he wanted peace as much as anyone. On the third day, the Tharun envoy arrived at Luna, and for the first time in history, one of their war leaders stood inside a human chamber surrounded by people. Instead of soldiers, he looked uneasy, his sharp eyes scanning everything as if he could not believe that humans truly wanted peace. Laura greeted him with respect, offering no words of blame, only understanding. She told him that both their peoples had lost much and that it was time to end the cycle of fear. The talks went on for weeks. The Tharun were cautious and proud, but they could not deny the strength of humanity or the wisdom of peace. In the end, a treaty was signed, It was simple both. Sides would stay within their borders and work together to rebuild the neutral zones the day it was announced. There were cheers across the colonies for many. It felt like the dawn of something better. But not everyone was happy in the shadows of the galaxy. The council watched the peace unfold with unease because they realized that the new order was being shaped without them. And that scared them deeply. They had once ruled the stars through unity and control, but now humanity had shown that peace could be built through strength and choice. Their influence was fading, and that truth was painful. Ethan knew this too, and he expected that the council would not stay silent for long. He began to strengthen the alliance fleets and worked closely with engineers to improve the next generation of ships. These new vessels were faster, sleeker, and equipped with technology that had never been shared outside human hands. Their designs were made not for conquest, but for defense and exploration. Laura supported his efforts, knowing that peace must always be protected together. They built what came to be known as the Guardian Network, a chain of satellites and stations that linked all major human systems, giving instant communication and early warning against any threat. It was one of the greatest achievements of the Terran Alliance, and it brought a sense of safety to the people. For the first time in centuries, life on the colonies began to bloom again. Children played under artificial skies, and farmers on Mars spoke proudly of their red harvests. Cities on Titan sparkled like jewels above the frozen plains, and travelers spoke of the beauty of the new worlds they were building. Yet beneath the calm there were still dangers. The council began spreading quiet rumors that humanity was preparing for domination. They sent secret agents to stir unrest among smaller species, telling them that humans would soon take everything they had. Ethan received reports of strange movements near the frontier, and he knew it was the council's hand trying to create fear. He decided to act before things could spiral out of control. He called a meeting with Laura and his top commanders to discuss their options. After long hours of talk, they agreed that the best answer was not war, but truth. Laura would invite representatives from independent worlds to visit human colonies to see with their own eyes that humanity sought cooperation, not control. Weeks later, delegates from across the stars arrived on Luna. They saw the factories, the schools, the clean cities, and the people who smiled not out of obedience but pride when they returned home. Their reports silenced many of the rumors and weakened the council's false stories. But the council leaders were furious, their power slipping through their fingers. One of them, a proud senator from the Zorathian race, demanded that action be taken against humanity, and in secret, they began to plan a way to pull them back under control. Their plan was simple. They would create a crisis that would force humanity to return to the council for help. It began when a group of unknown ships attacked a trade route shared by both human and neutral systems. They destroyed several freighters and blamed the Terran Alliance, claiming that human captains had gone rogue. The news spread fast, and for a moment chaos returned. Ethan immediately ordered an investigation, and within days his intelligence teams found proof that the attackers were mercenaries hired by someone within the council. Laura was furious, but she kept calm. She knew exposing the council too soon might cause another war. Instead, she and Ethan decided to play a longer game. They would gather evidence and show the truth to everyone at once. The plan worked. Over the next month, human agents uncovered transmissions and secret deals that linked the council senators to the attacks. When the proof was presented in a live broadcast across the galaxy, the council's authority shattered. The smaller species turned against them, refusing to follow leaders who had betrayed their own laws. The Galactic Council that once ruled over half the stars began to crumble under its own corruption. Humanity did not cheer, they simply watched, knowing that fate had finally balanced itself. Ethan looked out at the stars that night and said softly to Laura that the galaxy was entering a new age, and she agreed, saying that this time it would be built on honesty, not fear. As days turned into weeks, the council dissolved into chaos while humanity continued to build peacefully, exploring the edges of the unknown. Their ships carried settlers, scientists, and dreamers to new worlds, and every journey marked another step toward a future that no one could have imagined when they first left the council long ago. The stars no longer felt distant or cold. They felt like home. And as Ethan and Laura watched the first of the great generation ships vanish into the light of space, they knew that whatever came next, humanity would face it with the same courage and faith that had brought them this far together. as one unbroken people beneath the endless sky. Years passed and the stars grew quiet again. The war was over. The council had fallen, and humanity had become the strongest voice among the free worlds. But even in peace, there was always work to do. Ethan Brooks still served as admiral, though his hair had turned gray and his voice had become slower. His eyes, however, were sharp as ever. He often stood on the deck of the flagship Horizon, watching the stars slide past the glass and thinking about how far they had come. Sometimes he would smile, remembering the early days when they were small and uncertain. Now humanity's ships crossed every known system carrying food, medicine, and hope. Instead of weapons, the colonies were thriving. Luna had become a city of light, and Mars was green. In some valleys, thanks to decades of work, Laura Bennett still led the Terran Assembly, and under her the Alliance had grown wiser. She spent most of her time building ties with the worlds that once feared them. She believed that trust was stronger than force and that no one could rule the stars by fear forever. One day she received a message from the outer colonies that a fleet of unknown ships had been spotted near the edge of the Perseus sector. It was not the Council, and it was not the Tharun either. The ships carried no marks, no flags, and no signals. Ethan was called to investigate. He took the Horizon and 3 escort ships and left within the hour. The journey took days, and as they approached the dark edge of the sector, they found wreckage floating in the void, twisted metal and drifting pods, the signs of a great battle. Ethan ordered the crew to scan for survivors, and after hours they found one small pod. Inside was a being no one had seen before, tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like glass. It was alive but weak. They brought it aboard and the medical team began treatment. When it awoke, it spoke in a strange voice through a translator, saying that its people were fleeing from something terrible. Something that consumed stars and worlds without reason. The creature called it the Hollow. Its home system had been destroyed and now it was moving toward the center of the galaxy. The bridge fell silent as the words sank in. Ethan contacted Laura immediately and told her everything. She listened quietly, then said they must prepare for the worst within a week. The Terran Assembly met in emergency session. Messages came from the Tharun and other allied worlds. All had seen strange energy readings near their borders, confirming that something massive was moving through space unlike any known fleet or weapon. Ethan studied the data for hours with his science officers, and finally he said softly that it was not a fleet. It was a living thing. The Hollow was not a machine, it was alive, and it was feeding on the energy of suns. The Council archives once spoke of such a creature, something older than all races. But no one had believed it was real until now. Humanity had faced many enemies before, but never something like this. Laura called for unity, sending messages to every world that would listen, saying that if they did not stand together, none would survive. The response was slow at first, but when the Hollow destroyed 2 uninhabited systems in a single week, fear spread across the stars, and soon fleets from dozens of species joined under one banner led by the Terran Alliance. Ethan commanded the defense from the Horizon, which now served as the heart of the Grand Fleet. The plan was simple. They would gather at the rim of the Orion Arm and strike before the creature could reach populated systems. Thousands of ships filled the black sky, their engines glowing like fireflies in the dark. Ethan stood before his crew and told them that this fight was not for conquest or revenge, but for life itself. Laura spoke to the people across every colony, her voice calm and strong. She said that humanity had once been rejected by the galaxy, but now it was their duty to save it. When the Hollow appeared, it was like a storm of light and shadow. Its body stretched across space, bigger than a moon, its surface pulsing with energy. The first wave of weapons struck, but did nothing. The creature absorbed the fire and kept moving. Ethan ordered all ships to focus on its core, where sensors showed unstable energy fields. The battle lasted for hours. Waves of fighters and ships struck again and again. The void burned with explosions and light, but still the Hollow advanced until the Horizon sensors found what looked like a weakness near one of its energy vents. Ethan made a choice. He ordered the fleet to fall back and charged forward alone with his escorts. The plan was to deliver a fusion core into the vent and trigger a chain reaction that could tear the creature apart. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one left. Laura heard his message from Luna as he said that this was the price of leadership. and that peace sometimes needed sacrifice. She wanted to stop him. But there was no time. The horizon flew straight into the storm. The creature reacted, sending waves of energy that tore through shields and hulls, but the horizon kept going until it reached the vent. Ethan gave the final order to detonate. The core of the explosion was silent in the void, but its light filled every sensor across the fleet for a moment. It looked as if the stars themselves had been reborn. The hollow screamed and began to break apart, its light fading into dust. The fleet cheered, but their joy was short, for the horizon was gone. No trace remained. Laura watched the screens in silence, tears in her eyes. She whispered that he had saved them all. The hollow was gone, its energy scattered across the galaxy, and for the first time in memory, all races stood together in peace. Months later, a memorial was built on Luna. A tall pillar of silver carved with the names of those who had fallen at the top was Ethan Brooks. His statue looked toward the stars as if still watching over them. Laura spoke at the ceremony, telling everyone that courage was not only in battle but in the will to protect even those who once turned against you. She promised that humanity would never forget what unity could achieve. Years later, children in schools across the colonies learned of the day the hollow fell. They read stories of the horizon and the man who led it into the storm, and they dreamed of the stars not as places of fear, but as homes waiting to be discovered. Laura grew older, and when she finally retired, she looked out at the night sky one last time and saw fleets still moving. Not for war, but for peace, exploration, and hope. She smiled, knowing that humanity had truly begun a new era. The council was gone, the wars were memories, and the future now belonged to everyone together as one. The stars were no longer silent. They sang with life and freedom, and among them the name of humanity shone the brightest, for they had once been cast out, and now they were the light that guided all others home beneath the endless sky.